Thanks, everyone. It's us in the graveyard shift, or
Between you and your drinks.
it's or top of the bill. Take your pick. At top of the bill. But anyway, thanks for sticking around, and it's us between you and the dinner tonight and drinks. So hopefully we got some great content. I mean, we've been through this a couple of times, but we'll just introduce ourselves. So starting with me, I'm moderating today. I'm Charlie Bell. I'm a Senior Director of Solution Engineering at Contentful. Contentful is a content platform. You may think of it as content management. I've been in content management for about 20 years, so talking about words and pictures for about 20 years and how that helps drive digital experiences. And Arjoon, over to you.
Hi, I'm Arjoon. I work up at General Mills, which, in case some of you don't know, is a food company with leading legacy brands such as Häagen-Dazs, Old El Paso, Nature Valley. In the US, we're more known for a lot of our legacy cereals like Cheerios, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Lucky Charms, and I've spent 10 years on another legacy business in beauty with L'Oreal. So I've spent my entire career in marketing over the last 19 years on global brands across a mix of local, regional, and international brand building roles.
Fantastic. Okay, so let me set the scene here. When we think about legacy brands, there's a tendency to think about dead brands, but actually the one thing that we were talking about reviving legacy brands were the brands that were disruptive and influential in their day, but have kind of faded into the fabric of kind of the supermarket shop, if you like. And the brand that you and I were talking about, it was massively disruptive in its time, and it was one of those brands that was cutting through a kind of bland ubiquity of product at the time, and it really did transform the way that people thought about particular products. So maybe because I don't want to steal your thunder, but maybe we could just introduce that the brand and what we're going to talk about today.
Sure. And the first thing to say is, I mean, there is the jury is not out on what exactly you call as a legacy brand, but typically a legacy brand is one that's been around for a while. And typically it comes with a whole host of credibility and history. And sometimes it can sort of lapse into being fuddy-duddy. The brand we want to talk to you guys about is the reason why I joined the Mills. It's Häagen-Dazs, arguably the world's greatest, most desirable ice cream, or so we like to believe, and so a lot of consumers tell us. And way back when, the brand was set up exactly with that ambition, as a brand that opted to zag when everyone was zigging. Back in the world where ice cream was a sea of sameness, with ice cream really being about sweet, sickly, childish lollies, a couple in Brooklyn wanted to create the world's most indulgent, home pack style dense ice cream that really elevated the category. And that's really where the brand had its beginnings. So, contrary to popular opinion, Häagen-Dazs is not Scandinavian. It is not Dutch. It is a Brooklyner, and it had its start in really disrupting the category, first and foremost at the product level, by really driving indulgence. But then as we went along, the attempt to make sure that we sang from the same hymn sheet, product, price, promotion, and place, is what I would really attribute to its greatest success. Being, by creating the world's greatest ice cream, using ingredients, having more density than products out there, allowed you to really command a price premium way back in the 60s and 70s, way back in the 90s when we launched in Europe, all the way down to now where you're able to still survive, mass discountization. Finally, when it comes to place, one of our greatest philosophies is, as they say, is how do you build a brand for supermarkets? You don't by not being in the supermarket. You do it well before being there, because honestly, distribution is your greatest brand image. So for us, we built the brand with real equity in mind by being in places where consumers would want desirability and where they were willing to pay more for. So picking the most premium of distribution, you would come in there as an adult luxury ice cream. That was about indulgent. That was about being the ultimate. And finally, promotionally, we had to sort of walk the talk. So for those of you who've lived in the UK in the 90s, Häagen-Dazs, as we like to think, was the Benetton of ice cream. They broke in. They were sexy ice cream. They had a very sensual adult tonality in how they showed up. But the home truth was that its ingredients was what made it stand out a whole lot more. But we just made it more communicative in a really playful manner. So that was where we got our start. And that was really because we were super consistent across the 4 Ps that allowed the brand to have one of the greatest launches of all time, no matter which market it came into.
And it seems almost, absurd to say, but all of this was done in a pre-internet world. This was all done without social media. It was all done without internet. It was all done in this sort of traditional ad sense. But over time, as the internet picked up, as different brands grew, as people started getting more involved in luxury brands, the cachet, I suppose, of Häagen-Dazs kind of dropped. It sort of faded into the background. And so, what do you think was the genesis of that in terms of the General Mills outlook? How did what happened to Häagen-Dazs internally? Did it kind of fade away internally, or did it, just explain how that level dropped, how it stopped owning that love message that you had?
I think I'd probably say 2 things, and this is obviously way before my time. One, we are by and large a food company, and Häagen-Dazs was a real outlier in our business. If you think of us, this was the only sort of premium luxury brand in a whole portfolio of supermarket grocery brands. And so we started becoming similar to some of the brands in our family and how we started doing our product, our pricing, and how our promotional strategies were showing up. It also meant we were coming under immense competitive pressures because a lot of brands were out there not necessarily trying to copy us or be like us, but they were being the more value proposition brands. And so the minute you're into that sort of a promotional space, you start losing the focus on being the brand that is worth paying more for, and you're chasing volumes. So I think that's the first of this. The second is I feel like the codes of luxury changed, and we sort of started to become more unattainable, not in a desirable way, not in the most popular kind of ways. So we stayed the same without quite understanding what the new age consumers were seeking. So by standing still, we still had the love, or the latent love, I would say, of the baby boomers or the young Gen Xers whose imagination we had captivated. But very slowly, we were starting to get what I want to call the first kiss of death from millennials who said, "That is my mother's ice cream." And that is not a very pleasant place to be in. And that really for us was a bit of a wake-up call as a brand to say, holy shit, pardon the language. This really meant, we were losing our way. And being honest enough to say that, a great legacy brand, first and foremost, I love to talk about the 3 Ts of truth, transparency, and trust. And we probably hadn't really dived into those 3 Ts. So we had to go back into what really made us famous across those. And that in our opinion, was the start of what we call the brand reset. And we'll obviously want to talk about that with you.
And I think that generational shift is right? It's a real thing. I mean, my kids are 15, 17, and they say things like Facebook is for boomers, and they call me, and I don't even have Facebook, but they still call me a boomer, even though I'm not a boomer. But that generational shift, I think, it's not a new thing, but I think it's amplified by the perception of brands like Häagen-Dazs, my parents' ice cream. But it's important, I think, and for you, and we talked about this before, that you talked about the no leaky bucket type approach to reviving the brand. So staying true to your values and staying true to the original intent of the brand, but try and expand that out into the new generation of people who want to consume ice cream. Can you talk a little bit more about how that thinking formulated?
Sure. I mean, FMCG marketers tend to use the term leaky bucket a whole lot. And for us, it essentially meant, the brand really hadn't gained in penetration for 10 odd years, right? We had stayed very stable, and then we were starting to lose, consumers, or we weren't starting to get enough trial. And that really was happening in, and this is something I referenced back to like 6-7 years back. Addressing the leaky bucket meant understanding your consumers who were still in it with you, what they liked about you. We weren't seeing great shifts in any of our equity metrics in terms of we weren't anymore the brand you were willing to pay more for, or a brand like me. But so we needed to understand where we stood with the consumers who made us famous in the first place and who were still buying us. Understanding that we still mattered to them was the first step, and that meant whatever we were doing or whatever we were going to be courageous enough to do to really step change the brand across the 4 Ps didn't alienate them. So that's the first piece of the leaky bucket. And then obviously you want to have a growth target in mind, or at least the ones, let's say, your core competitors were gaining with, and understand how and why would they typically pick me. And that had to be across the range of the other 4 Ps, right? We've traditionally been, back in the 80s or 90s, when ice cream was sold in 1 liter boxes, we came in with a 500 ml tub that was a pint, and it was a disruptive measure that really helped you stand out in stores. But we also invented what was the sharing category ice cream. We also started, I want to say, going into spaces that necessarily didn't belong to us. So it was important to pull out and then really go back into, hey, what do we stand for? What do people love us? And where could we go next? And do it in a way that was distinctly Häagen-Dazs. So again, in terms of legacy brands, being distinctive, being authentic, and being credible for us had to be top of mind. And I'd say the fourth one was, we use terminologies like innovating, but it really meant being modernizing and understanding where the consumer is at. It didn't mean a massive step change or doing something absolutely revolutionary, but it was about being evolutionary with the times, and that's kind of what modernization is about. And that's innovation as we see it in our approach.
And before we come to that innovation, is looking at the new marketing functions and the new stuff that you're putting around that, the important thing here is that we're talking about quite a big. There's a lot of sales in you sell a lot of ice cream, and the micro changes, the micro adjustments you make in terms of the marketing approach to things has a massive macro impact. Because if you're looking at something that you're selling, let's pick a number, £1 billion worth of ice cream globally, a 2% shift in marketing penetration or marketing sales that's £20 million, which is of course not to be sniffed at. So how do you then refine that down into the content strategy and reaching into the modern ways of managing the content that sits around the brand, the content positioning, how you build your content strategy around that to align into the new social and apps and mobile and kiosks and point of sales, every digital touch point where customers are interacting with your brands?
It starts kind of with the culture internally, right? Like, I mean, if we had tended to be a very conservative culture, which believed largely in the above-the-line approach, and that had delivered for us on years and years using marketing metrics and ROI, it needed us to be able to shift the dial and take a bit of a test and learn approach, really. So you start with one market, go all in on that market. In this instance, it was the UK, which is where I was at, and we said, we had to fundamentally step change the business model, but also the marketing model in terms of going from ANCP model, which was 90% TV and 10% below the line, into flipping it and upping our digital spends 5 times more, and having very clear, robust measurabilities. So as I talk to the 3 Ts, we talk a lot about the 3 Rs, and that was sort of, I would say, our biggest index, which is reach, resonance, and relevance. Like, you had to make sure that you were measurable on the numbers. You had to make sure that resonance was resonating via penetration, via market share, via trial, and then finally via relevance, or you shifting your brand equity metrics.
And dynamism in terms of your content strategy, in terms of the way you're adapting to the data, is that something else that you're thinking about when you're designing your strategy? Is that if I try something and it works, I want to do more of it, but if I try something and it's not quite there or it needs adjusting, I need to be able to turn it around quite quickly?
I mean, internally, we used to have a process that we called Innovation Labs that flipped over and started being known as Activation Labs. And that was, for lack of a better word, a bit of a test and learn approach where you had clear KPIs, you had an MVP for being able to be first to market. So it was like the new, nascent, and the now. And depending on what it was there an applicability that you could bring back to the business, to other brands, to other regions? And you had a timeline within which to measure it. And all of our timelines were typically within a 3 to 6 month period. And we were able to translate those results back to the business. So more often than not, this approach allowed us to have a little bit of a, try fast, fail fast, but bring the learning back into the business mindset. And I'd say that is one that we've tended to approach more and more to get out of the legacy brand mindset. Because in a legacy brand mindset, we have the more if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. Whereas here it's a bit like you've got to move with the times, and try and understand what the new age consumers are doing. And it started seeing the results, right? And it started with when I talked to the other Ps, as a brand, we weren't playing in 50% of the ice cream market, which was sticks, which is handheld, but being able to have a compelling proposition that was uniquely us allowed us to go in there and allowed us to go into what you would call is the on-the-go handheld occasion. And we were driving, I want to say, value into the category, which mattered for our customers and retailers. But you were also able to stay true to your USP, which is ultimate indulgence to your consumers. And we did all of this not in a traditional way. And being able to see the results of that measured through marketing mix modeling gave us a ton of confidence to keep doing that, keep going into, I want to say, new social platforms, but also doubling down on the ones that were working.
And that's something that I see, I talk to a lot of big companies, and the thing that I see that's consistent amongst companies who are continually successful is this idea that they will disrupt their own business. They have their own internal innovation labs whose job it is to try out new things, to try out, to look at things like AI, the impact of that, and disrupt tech landscapes and say, okay, should we be going down this path and that path? So it's quite encouraging that you guys are seeing the same thing as well. And so coming back to the Haagen-Dazs story, when you set out to revitalize a brand, how do you set the KPIs for that? How do you set the targets to say, okay, these will be our measures of success?
I'd say the 3 R's again. So again, making sure that whatever we were able to do had the most reach. Like, for example, any initiative we had to do had to sing, you were singing the same hymn sheet on the 4 Ps and then translating it down into reach, resonance, and relevance, right? And being able to measure that, and staying the course. I think one of the sort of fallacies of FMCG brands is, if we're not starting to see the results quickly, we start to panic. And in truth, we didn't see the results in a few markets. But what you start to see is when you start to see the results in some markets, you dive quickly into the learnings and you're able to translate those back into other markets. So it gives them hope and courage. So it's very easy for us to, I don't want to say course correct, but the advantage of a global matrix network is, something that's working somewhere, we have more similarities than differences. And somewhere when you're a global marketing role and you're working with a lot of different markets and everyone's like, I need X or I'm different to you, I disagree when you're entrusted and when you're lucky enough to steward a global legacy brand that you go back to the foundations, and the foundations largely remain unchanged. So staying the course, and what we typically say is stable on strategy, but fresh on execution is what's enabled us to stay the course.
And you said right at the outset that there was this internal idea, this thinking of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But you set out with a plan to break things and to come up with new strategies and disrupt the way that the Häagen-Dazs brand was perceived. How did you then navigate the key stakeholders and get their buy-in to allow you to break it? What was the approach to that, to get the support from them?
I would probably say, like, depending on where we are at, I mean, Häagen-Dazs is our number one brand within the international segments. General Mills is divided as a North America segment and international, which is all of the other regions that you have stuck against my name. And stakeholder management is complex in such a navigation. I'm not going to lie, and getting them to agree behind one big thing. But it's a great legacy brand has to have the power to say no. And being able to say no to 1 million requests and really taking a simplistic approach often allows you to have a single rallying cry. So in our ability to simplify, we found unison behind one rallying target. And by keeping it simple and getting after one result, then you can start to double down, right? Saying, hey, everyone, we're going to be doing this one thing. There's one deadline, one timeline, and everyone's unified to that. It's business as usual on the rest.
Yeah.
But having that one big North Star, which is kind of what it was when we launched, we said we're not going to, we're not going to accept the acceptable. And that's the same principle that we try and keep.
I love that. Not going to accept the acceptable. And so, so just then, obviously we've talked a lot about Häagen-Dazs, and the work that you did with that. But Häagen-Dazs is only one of your brands. You have lots of other different brands. How has the activity and the impact of what you've been doing with Häagen-Dazs then feeding back into the other brands and the thinking around how you go to market with them? Maybe you could even mention some of their brands. I don't know if people know.
I mean, for those who, the other brands, we've got a bunch, and I'd say I'll focus on the global priority brands, which are like Old El Paso, which is, leading grocery Mexican brand, or Nature Valley, which is which is the world's largest snack bar brand. We try to stay as stable as we can on the brand foundations, but taking inspiration from where we've seen innovation, where we've seen certain consumer segments win. The biggest learning for us has been meeting the consumers where they're at, and therefore designing for it across your 4 Ps. That's probably where we've seen the biggest shifts in how we go to market, how we bring in new brands. I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, there was, I talk about the snacking category. The snacking category had seen a plethora of activity in what we call active nutrition and protein. And the wellness category, which is about diet, had started to sort of, in a way, started to really dip. And it was really upon us to understand that, once you understood what were the driving forces behind those categories, you were able to come back and get into categories that were not yours to play in. Almost like when we went into stick bars, which is very much a Unilever Magnum terrain, coming in with a proposition that we were good at, that consumers are seeking, that would take us into channels where the other competitors weren't able to do as well, allowed us to really win in the market. A great example of that was Fiber One. I don't know if any of you guys know that. This was basically 90-calorie brownies, which started with being taste first, because the category did all of the right cues in terms of promising, Weight Watching, and Weight Watchers as a brand had sort of dictated that narrative, but nobody had ever led from the lens of taste.
Right.
And being able to define a purpose of saying we exist to make dieting suck less gave us a lot of credibility to go out there and have a lot of fun and make the category fun again.
Yeah, and I suppose the you're taking the learnings from the marketing execution side of things, the pace, the speed of change. It's not just about the brand positioning, but it's also about the underpinning technology that kind of enables that to happen. And so taking the learnings from that, I expect is this ripple effect out into the other parts of the business, where you're proving what value in one brand, and then it's rippling out into the other brands because they want that kind of reach and attainment and velocity in terms of how they're getting content out in front of people.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So that's the title of this is Reviving Legacy Brands and How to Future-Proof Your Marketing. So I don't know that we can possibly future-proof anything, but can you maybe talk a little bit about what the future holds for you, what you're thinking about now in terms of the marketing strategy, what you think the big things are going to be in the next couple of years?
I mean, I think marketing is probably at its most interesting, scary, and most disruptive sort of frontier as we lean into it. But again, I mean, without being scared of what the future has to hold, I think if we stick and stay very clear on your brand foundations, I think everything in consumer marketing starts with the consumer. And so having that absolute consumer obsession, whether it's technology or whether it's even anything, right? Just their habits, and being able to really serve your consumer with that lens is one that certainly future-proofs us for growth, right? The second thing is to really embrace marketing's role as a growth creator. I think sometimes we accuse ourselves of going after the new shiny object, but fundamentally, marketing's role is to create demand and drive growth. And so staying true to that path and sticking the course there, I would say, is what's going to keep us going, keep our legacy brands going for the next 100-odd years as a company that's been around for 100+ years. And embracing technology. I think it's not about like putting all your eggs in that basket, but really understanding the brands that are best suited, the countries that are best suited, have great partners, agencies, certainly ones where we need help, where we need guidance. So, we're all in this together. So I think the advice I would give marketers brand side or agencies brand side is, I think we have to hold hands through this one. And and we will grow, and the jobs that we have are only going to get further enhanced, and the experiences we're able to offer our consumers are only going to be that much more elevated.
And I think one of the things that I heard someone say just recently, actually, there isn't an enterprise out there who's going as fast as they would like to go, and actually adding more complexity is only going to slow you down. So I hear a lot about AI, and I think I think it's a massive opportunity. But I was speaking to someone who's the senior brand manager for a perfume company, and they said, look, I can make 800 pack shots in generative AI in no time at all, but 90% of it is rubbish, and I spend my time sifting the 90%. Now I'm not dumbing down AI, but I'm thinking what I'm trying to get to is that responsibility on the marketer and in your role is to take a pragmatic view as to when is the right time to bring this in, when's the right time to bring the technology in to add the value to the brand, to the company, to the offering that we do for the internal people, the marketers who are writing our content strategy.
I think the first thing to say, it has to be embraced at an enterprise level, right? And as legacy brands, as part of legacy companies, we have the unique position and the resources to be able to scale things up. So I'd say if you are in that unique position, this is your moment to start influencing upwards. Whether it's your CMO or whether it's the leaders in your agency ecosystem and your partners, to ensure that we are upskilling our teams. And it really is a matter of resource and prioritization, right? And how you feel it's going to really enhance your brands and specifically how you're going to serve your consumers. So it starts right at the top. It starts with, I remember when Web3 came, at Mills, we rushed to it and we were like, hey, we need to have a global metaverse council. Everyone got in there. I was lucky to be a part of it. And we spent a ton of time out there. And then and once we decided to really educate the universe, something went bust. So it's also on us to really try and stay as true to what is it that is going to make our jobs easier, simpler, and what is it that's going to make our consumers' lives better, and then apply it, right? And so if we're able to really build a case for it in marketing, I'd say it's within the whole 70, 20, 10. But within the 10, you want to break down into the now, which is the 1 or 2%. So maybe allocate a little bit of your money to be able to test and learn that, and then start to scale that up.
Fantastic. Look,
but really parking some budgets for that, for us, has always been a great way for us to try the now without doing or stopping any of the brilliant basics.
Well, that's Arjoon, thank you very much. It's been fantastic. We're at time, and everyone looks really thirsty. So I think we should probably wrap it up there. But thank you again for speaking with us today. And,
thanks, Charlie.